This is David Wiggins from George Mason University, and I was elected into the National Academy of Kinesiology in 2007 with the number 483. And I'm talking this afternoon with Shirl Hoffman. Shirl was elected into the National Academy of Kinesiology in 1998 with the number 399. Shirl received his undergraduate degree from King's College in New York and his MA in Educational Doctorate from Columbia University Teachers College. He was on the faculty at the University of Pittsburgh for 13 years and on the faculty and actually chair of the program at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Well, faculty for 16 years and I believe chair for 10. He has a wide range of scholarly interests, including applied motor learning, issues that confront higher education, and sport and religion. Among his many publications is his edited anthology on Sport and Religion, and is co-editor with Janet Harris, a book titled Introduction to Kinesiology. Sure, let's start out by doing this. If you could talk a bit about your early childhood, where you were born and raised, and talk a little bit about your family.
I was born and raised in western Pennsylvania, in a small town, college town north of Pittsburgh called Grove City, Pennsylvania. It was me and my mother and father and my brother, and my father was a lay minister who had a small country church and also held down a job in a local factory. My mother was a housekeeper. Sports were an integral part of my and my brother's early years. I lettered in 3 sports multiple times. I won the athletic award at graduation, and so involved in sports that to the extent that I had a career plan at all, I knew it would have something to do with sport. As it turned out, my brother was killed in an automobile accident my freshman year in college. He was due to arrive on campus in 2 days and had that unfortunate occurrence. But we had a lot of good times together and a lot of good times to reflect on. As you said, I went to a small school in King's College, which exists in somewhat different form now in Empire State Building in New York City. But this was in Westchester County, north of New York City. I played basketball there, majored in physical education, and ended up getting injured, knee injuries, both knees, fairly early in my career, which ended up being career-wise maybe a lucky break, because I ended up coaching the junior varsity team, and as a result of that, had an entree into the coaching profession at a very young age, and I'll talk about that later. But like many young professionals in the 60s, I was the first in my family, immediate or extended, to graduate from college, and everything was exciting. College was exciting, the career was exciting, and look back on those years with fond memories.
Now, I'm interested, Shirl, was your father an athlete as well?
No, my father was not an athlete. My father was very supportive, unlike some ministers at the time who thought sports evil. He was very supportive of his sons being in sports. Interesting story, basketball, we had a kind of an ogre for a basketball coach. He was very good. We won the county championship when I played, but he was a real tough taskmaster, and he demanded that the players attend all practices, of course, and the practices were held in the early evening. Well, Wednesday night was prayer service in our Baptist church. My father insisted that this be something I go to, and it looked like I was going to have to give up basketball in order to attend this. And my father felt could talk this coach into about anything. My father thought he could talk anybody into anything. And I'll never forget waiting outside the coach's office, just terribly upset that I was going to have to give up basketball because I knew neither of these men would give in. And I still remember my father coming out, didn't say anything, got in the car. He didn't say anything. We got home and he said, "You can play basketball."
That's a great story. Had you? I'm also interested in. You said you had an excellent athletic career at the high school level. Had you thought about other institutions to play? Did you want to play at the intercollegiate level, maybe Division I? Had that crossed your mind?
Well, like my academic career in sport, I was a generalist. I was a better than average basketball player. As a football player, I was what you might call a skinny center, and held the position by virtue of the fact that the two guys that were bigger than me couldn't center the ball back to the punter. But I played 4 years there in track and field. I was a high jumper, didn't jump very high, but higher than the few kids around in the school. So I didn't have a lot of options. I didn't explore many options. The King's College was a religious-based institution, and my brother had gone there the year before, and that was pretty much picked out by my parents as this is where you're going to go. And I'm glad I did. I had a tremendous education there and great experience being in and around New York City.
Were your parents supportive of you majoring in physical education?
Yes. I don't think my parents had many educational aspirations for me. My father just knew he didn't want his son working in a factory like he did. Mm-hmm. And of course, my father was a very bright man, could have succeeded in a lot of different professions, but back then the opportunities simply weren't there. No pressure at all. It was pretty much left up to me.
Interesting. Very good. Let's move on. Shirl, what do you consider to be the highlights of your educational and professional career?
Well, that's hard. That's really hard to pin down. I guess highlights in terms of like a summary of my career, like a highlights of a sports reel. My first job out of school was as an elementary physical education teacher in White Plains, New York, which incidentally I loved. I'll never forget the phone call from the superintendent. They called back then, who told me that I had been hired and I had so much ruled this wonderful job out of my mind. I couldn't remember exactly who he was. He had explained to me that he was the superintendent of White Plains Public Schools and he was offering me a job. I spent 3 years there in this wonderful environment with kids. Half of the kids were from an impoverished area and the other half of the kids were from high-rise luxury apartments. And it just taught me an awful lot about life, and I probably grew more than the kids that I taught. While I was there, I think the second year I was teaching, I got a call from the athletic director and basketball coach at Westchester Community College, which was a big community college in White Plains, near White Plains. And we had known each other since I had coached the JV team and we had scrimmaged against his team. And I guess he noticed me coaching and called and said, I'd like you to come and be my assistant coach. And if things work out, I'd like you to take over the head coaching job in a few years when I bow out. And I was at the time about 22 or 23 years old. This was a tremendous opportunity. And I served for his assistant for 3 years. 2 of them when I was in public school. And then I quit that job and they hired me as a head coach at Westchester Community College. And it was probably a highlight of my career to have been given such an opportunity at a very young age. And I continued to complete a master's degree at Columbia and entered the doctoral program. And as I did that, my interest turned to things more academic than coaching. Coaching was fun, but I was really inspired by the faculty at Columbia to pursue an academic career. So I eventually left coaching, took a huge pay cut, and returned to my alma mater, King's College, where they offered me a job where I could teach all kinds of interesting courses, including exercise physiology and kinesiology and history and philosophy of sport and physical education. So I was there for a year, and then Columbia offered me a job as a lecturer for a year, where I taught courses that Larry Locke, who was my advisor and mentor, had taught. He had left Columbia for University of New Mexico. And so I did that for a year, and that was a real kick. And then after 1 year, I took a job at University of Nebraska at Omaha. Went out there with a fellow by the name of Dick Flynn, who had just finished up his degree at Columbia. And Flynn actually ended up as president of Springfield College, where he had a 10 or 12-year career, just retired from there. But we both went out to University of Nebraska at Omaha and put together a master's degree program. And while we were there, I finished collecting data and writing my dissertation there. And then just after completing it, was all charged up to have this fantastic academic career. I got a phone call one Saturday morning from an uncle of my wife then, and he was president of a large savings and loan in upstate New York, and he had decided for one reason or another that I should succeed him as president of the savings and loan. That was a tough decision, but in the end, there was considerable money involved. Difficult decision, but I decided I had to give it a try. So I left the academy, went to upstate New York, and after 1 year there, how should I put this? I found two things. One, I don't think I would enjoy the banking environment the rest of my life. And two, I really missed the academy. And then thanks to an ad in the Sunday New York Times, I discovered that University of Pittsburgh was looking for someone with interests and qualifications like mine. So I applied and got the job, and I stayed there 13 years. And then eventually took the job as department head at UNCG in 1985. And it was clearly one of the highlights of my career. That was a tremendous opportunity. I was charged with advancing the department's graduate program and given a lot of resources to do it, including resources for hiring faculty and attracting graduate students. We hired a stellar faculty in those first few years from 1985 to 1990, including Dan Gould, Diane Gill, Kathy Williams, Alan Goldfarb, all of whom went on to become members of the Academy. And I stepped out of the headship in 1995 and then took advantage of the university's phased retirement program in 2004 and officially retired in 2007. And in the meantime, I've busied myself with writing and revising the Intro to Kinesiology textbook, which is now in its 5th edition, or 4th edition, soon to be in its 5th, I guess, and writing some other stuff, and in editing Kinesiology Today for the American Kinesiology Association. Right. And also during that time, when I stepped out of retirement, I was asked to be the charter executive director of the American Kinesiology Association, and that was a lot of fun, helping get that off the ground, and just seeing that grow. That was that would also be considered a highlight of my career. Yes.
Tell me, Shirl, why Columbia? Was there a particular person or persons there that you wanted to work with specifically?
Well, practically, I think it was this, because I was probably so uninitiated that I didn't know significant people. Probably was the fact that there were two places to do doctoral study in New York. One was NYU and one was Columbia. Columbia had better parking. That's probably not
parking,
the example.
Parking becomes important.
What I soon found was that it was a terrific choice on my part, because it was a stellar faculty and inspiring, and all the good things I could think about, I would attribute to that faculty there. So it didn't take me long to realize that I had made a good decision. Of course, Columbia's reputation, I think, is a factor too in selecting a school, and it really lived up to its reputation.
Nice. What early leaders in the field most affected your career? Any stories about those individuals, Shirl?
Well, I mean, I think without question, Larry Locke would be the person I would put my finger on, if only because he's the guy that got me on the path to a career as an academic. He was, a guy that to me modeled what a professor was all about. He was a tremendous inspiration to me at Columbia. Interesting, the first time I met him, he had a full beard. First time I had seen anybody in physical education with a beard. His office was lined with disarticulated skeletons because he was into kinesiology, which what we call now biomechanics at the time. And I remember seeing him out in the hallway with a bag of soccer balls. He was teaching soccer to, I think, some Peace Corps students at one of the athletic fields on Columbia's campus. Not typically what you think of Larry Locke now, but he was, he's this broad thinker. He introduced me to, literature that went far beyond the narrow confines of kinesiology, and embodied the traits of a good teacher, that he instilled in us a desire to learn. And I think anybody that had the benefit of being in Larry's course would say the same thing. I don't think I would have continued to immerse myself in the field were it not for Larry. And then a little bit later, Darrell Siedentop, who I came to appreciate for kind of thinking outside the box, who's kind of one of the earliest memories of Darrell was his debate with Don Hellison at an AFERD meeting. Here you had a confirmed behaviorist, Siedentop, confronting a confirmed humanist, Hellison, and it was a really well-attended meeting, and it was a lot of fun. Others, it's dangerous to do this because you're almost sure to leave someone out, but Bob Gooten, who served actually as my dissertation advisor at Columbia, even though Bob was an exercise physiologist and my dissertation was more in motor learning, he was willing to guide me through that process. I've continued to see Bob. He moved down to North Carolina, and we see he and Shelley from time to time. Hal Lawson was an early influence, John Loy. But when I think about your question, Dave, I go back even kind of earlier. Some of the old people that wrote the textbooks that I read in undergraduate school, Delbert Oberteuffer, Jesse Faring Williams, Tom Curitin, even though, again, he's an exercise physiologist. Oh, here's a story for you. He came to, when I was at Columbia, Curitin came to Hunter College in New York, and he was going to give this summer seminar. It was going to be 2 weeks, and so we thought we'd all go and, get updated on exercise physiology, which we did, but it was, 5 or 6 hours a day. It was an extensive course. We thought it was all going to be sitting at the desk learning, and we just found out that the morning was academics, the afternoon was actually exercise. And of course, it was a chance for Curitin not only to lead us in exercise, but to show us at, I don't know what his age was, he certainly was over 70, how fit he was, you know. And, hey, we're going to hop 400 hops on right foot. What, are you kidding me? We're going to do press up with your arms extended. And then we're all exhausted, and he's, okay, into the pool. And this just kept. And then, you know, the textbooks, too. I think textbooks probably are more influential than we give them credit for. I don't say that simply because I have one. But
right.
I look, you know, thinking about the question, I taught biomechanics for introductory biomechanics for quite a bit of my career. Jim Hayes' book,
Yes.
Marion Brower's book on human movement, Catherine Wells in kinesiology, and then motor learning, which I taught a lot of. Bob Singer, Dick Schmidt, Chris Whispered, Jay Coakley in sports soc, Scott Kretschmar and William Morgan, John Lucas in sport history. I mean, all of these people, in a way, had an influence on me, not as direct as the people I contacted with on a daily basis, but still, you know, they deserve a mention because they did have an influence on me. And I probably should just take a minute to. You did allude to it in your introduction, but take a few words to talk about an interest that it rarely surfaces in the context of kinesiology, although in my mind it probably fits squarely within it. It's my long-standing interest in the topic of sport and religion. And in 2010 published a book, Good Game, Christianity and the Culture of Sports, that was essentially the result of several decades of research and thinking, and that probably would be, I would figure that one of the biggest highlights of my career, simply because it was the culmination of an awful lot of work.
Well, I think one of the things that's so interesting about your career, Shirl, is that, you know, we have so many individuals, it seems to me anyway, that are so specialized, that are primarily associated with just one disciplinary area within our field. But you're someone that has a plethora of interest, and I find that so, quite frankly, so unique and refreshing as far as I'm concerned. And is that the specialization that's taken place? And maybe we could talk about this later in a couple of other questions. But do you see that as a limitation of our field now? Or maybe you don't even agree with that assessment. But has that been a positive?
I think your assessment of me and my career as a generalist is spot on. I was fortunate to have come into the field at an early stage and have just been able to function in an environment that allowed me to do whatever interested me. And fortunately, I was able to develop credibility as a scholar. I'm not sure I would now, because to be a generalist is a kiss of death in our field, which I think always kind of struck me as a bit odd. I can understand some of the reasoning, but it seemed to me we need people that can think not just outside the box, but across the whole discipline, not simply from within one area. Yeah, I view the hyper-specialization not as something bad in and of itself, but probably what it has caused us to become, which is, you know, silos with people who may not, when you come right down to it, have any specialization. That is, they may be biomechanists, but they're not necessarily any different than engineers in an engineering department. They may be motor learning control people, but not any different than people that do the same thing in the psychology department. And it seems to me, if you're going to argue for a discipline, you've got to show that discipline is unique. And I think when you hyper-specialize, you break yourself into units, none of which are technically that unique, at least not unique to the field of kinesiology.
What did you find your background and your kind of their general interest? Do you think in many ways that served you well as the chair of a high-profile PhD program?
Yeah, it did. There's no question about that, because you have at least an appreciation of where people are coming from in different disciplines when they make requests for lab funds, or they make requests, or they're putting together a research proposal or whatever. And I think you can be of more help to them than you might be the case if you were locked into one discipline. I think it helped a lot too in this Intro to Kinesiology book that that I mentioned, which is seems to now be quite popular. So it seems to be satisfying some needs out there, and I think it helped me with a broad view of the field, maybe be of help to the authors. It's an edited book. We have really terrific people that are authors in that book, but maybe allow me to maybe ask better questions and respond and kind of entertain a design for the book that I wouldn't have had I been maybe more narrow in my interests.
Right. Shirl, let me ask you this. Any special memories of those individuals who entered the academy the same year as you did? It was a large class, if I recall, 1998.
It was. And the one I remember most is Dave Perrin, who came in the same year. And Dave and I had crossed paths at University of Pittsburgh. When I was there, he had an office somewhere down the hall from me, and he was head of the academic athletic training program there and finishing his PhD in exercise physiology. And we had known each other, kind of passing acquaintance, but I'd always admired his demeanor and his bright mind and everything when talking to him. Didn't see him really again, I don't think, until we met coming into the academy. And then realized what a reputation he had developed in athletic training sports medicine at University of Virginia, where he sponsored like 40 or 50 graduate doctoral students and has become really a person that's really well known and well respected in that field. When I was at shortly after that, we needed a dean at University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I thought that I would nominate Dave, and I did, and Dave ended up being the dean, and then later became provost and vice chancellor, and now has moved on to University of Utah, where he's a dean of health science out there. And Dave and I and my wife Claude have become very close friends. And see each other a lot, and we're still at this stage of the game wallowing in our grief because Dave has left Greensboro. We know we'll miss him, but I always trace that back to the academy.
I did not realize that he had taken that position.
Yes, he just took it a few weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago.
I see. Shirl, what do you consider the major turning points in kinesiology? Good things, not so good things. What would you say? Well,
someone who started his career in the 60s. I've said this many times. I think I lived through the most exciting phase of our discipline, or perhaps any discipline that has developed, because the changes took place fairly rapidly, and they took place at the same time that those of us in that generation were kind of forming our careers and getting our feet wet in the discipline. I would say what happened in the 60s, this reconceptualization of physical education as an academic discipline, along with the rise of the sub-disciplines, the transformation of, what was once a profession simply for training physical education teachers became this expanded discipline that encompassed a ton of specializations. I remember the first motor learning book. I remember, when kinesiology moved from being simply muscles and bones to being more about mechanics. I use kinesiology in the old sense of the term. I remember when exercise physiology had pretty much one text, and that was Peter Karpovich's text,
right.
And developed into a sub-discipline with sub-disciplines of its own. And I just think it was one of the highlights of my career to have been given to have been given this opportunity to, be around when those developments took place. And I think it's been good. The good is our field grew in ways that we never imagined back in the 60s when we were trying to define the parameters of the discipline. I think it garnered respect for the study of physical activity and for our departments within universities. And, it's led to all these career opportunities for our students and generated, I think, largely, a wealth of information about physical activity. I think it's sad that this growth, the story of the growth of kinesiology as a discipline, in fact, the whole story of where our discipline started, the significant people in our discipline, that's really not taught much to our young students. And I was just thinking the other day, I can't imagine a psychology student graduating without knowing anything about B.F. Skinner.
Right.
But I venture that most students graduating from our programs don't have a clue about the B.F. Skinners of our field, the Obertufers and the Williams and the Sargent and the Curetons and others. I don't think that's good. And then the other kind of negative of it, I think, has been, and what we talked about before, that the specialization has bred this fragmentation that I think we still have to worry that it ultimately may prove to be dangerous. We're still, we're still a young and I think still evolving discipline, I'll go back and reiterate a point I mentioned earlier, that the whole concept of a discipline of kinesiology, that is a field of study, has to rest on the assumption that it has a unique potential. And I think we need to think more about what that unique potential of kinesiology is. I would contend that the potential is for integrating multidisciplinary perspectives on physical activity problems, which I guess is the justification for sub-disciplines. I just don't know how you can defend a department of kinesiology in a university when you have so many other disciplines that are now investigating problems related to physical activity. I mean, you can take almost any department in the university, and they're all, one way or another, talking about exercise or sport or human movement or physical activity or health and movement. And I don't think we can defend ourselves as a discipline unless we show that we have something different to offer. And that difference, it seemed to me, is the ability to blend these multiple perspectives, something that more narrowly focused research in psychology or biology or public health might take. I think that we really need to be about drawing clear lines that separate kinesiology from other disciplines in the university that study sport, exercise, and physical activity.
It seems. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It seems to me, Shirl, what you're suggesting, it sounds quite similar to what Franklin Henry suggested in 1964.
Yep.
Isn't that exactly the kind of thing that Franklin Henry was arguing for?
Exactly. He was not arguing for separate subdisciplines to go their own way. He was arguing for this integrative view of our field that I think early on we either misread or ignored. But I would also say that the reconceptualization of physical education that started in the 60s, that continues. We continue to reconceptualize the field, and what I'm a little concerned with now is I see a narrowing of the focus of the field to kind of biology and health,
right,
and a shift away from what used to be kind of a more comprehensive focus that encompassed the social sciences and the humanities.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could argue about why that has happened, but I think we're slowly seeing sport historians and people that study sociocultural aspects of sport not being replaced in departments, and departments turning into more kind of technically oriented, in some cases, departments that might better be situated in the health professions. And I think the public health emphasis, which, by the way, is going to be the topic of the AKA meeting in January, Kinesiology and Public Health. I think that in many ways we are duplicating the efforts of people in public health. You could say, well, they're duplicating our efforts. Well, then we have to ask ourselves what kind of a discipline we are that people in other disciplines can aid our discipline. But I really think, we're seeing some departments move into this narrow biology, and then pretty soon they become something called integrative biology, and pretty soon they're not really even in our field anymore. So that's just one of the things that I worry about. Although I'm an inveterate worrier, I will say that. And then I would say this, Dave. I think fundamentally our problem as a discipline is that we still probably don't operate on a very good operational definition of what our field is. I still think we need to lay out in clear, unambiguous ways what is kinesiology's, specific contribution to society, and then how this should fit into a curriculum.
Right.
I look at the departments across the land and multiple names that still exist, and the way some people still interpret kinesiology as exercise or applied anatomy. I look at people that don't think teacher education or sport management or even athletic training have anything to do with kinesiology. AKA has been very vigorous about trying to perpetuate a holistic view of our field, but I don't know if it's catching on. So that's
interesting.
That's another development, I think, that comes with our kind of evolving status as a discipline.
Well, it certainly seems to me, Shirl, I think you're right about the social sciences and humanities fields being marginalized. Sport history, as you mentioned, would certainly be one of them. Philosophy of sport, I think, would be another one, and maybe to a lesser extent, sociology of sport. But wouldn't you also contend that what has also been left out, and I think you and I had a conversation about this not too long ago in another setting, but wouldn't you also contend that sport in many ways has been left out of the equation?
There's no question about it. Yeah, I thought of that when I was answering your previous question. Yeah, there's no question. Sport is gradually being phased out. It's as though our field only deals with exercise anymore, and that's a very, very narrow foundation on which I think to try to support a discipline. With sport, I just had a conversation with Steve Estes by email recently about the fact that we haven't been a voice to any of the things wrong with sport in higher education. Now, when you think that we are the only discipline that purports to study sport, the only discipline in the university that purports to offer curricula for people that want to have sport careers, and we have nothing to say about some of the really questionable stuff that's going on in athletics or voice an opinion. That's a bit scary. All the voices for sport or criticizing sport, supporting sport, seem to all come from other disciplines or journalists, sports writers. But we don't seem to be that interested in sport, or we seem to be too worried about criticizing sport. I think there's an opinion out there by a few that people in our field, particularly in sports management, and I'm not condemning all of sports management, and I'm not condemning sports management, but I think there's a feeling among some sports management folks that they have to be supportive of athletics because this is where their students are going to get jobs, when maybe the better role is to be voicing some concerns.
I would agree with that. Maybe one last question, Shirl. And I think in some ways you've already answered or talked about this a little bit, but what's your hope for kinesiology in the future? And any specific recommendations that you might give to ensure our success?
Well, I probably have covered that more or less, David. My hope would be that this continues to be a field that not just grows in numbers, but a field that continues to find ways in which it can make a contribution to society. I think it's time we need to take seriously the relationship, I guess, between our field and the needs of society, because I think that's the way higher education is going. I think the people that support higher education are really looking at ways, at payoffs for higher education, and I think we need to probably take a closer look at that. I think we need to look more closely at the professional applications of our field. I mean, the one in particularly that I'm concerned about now is the preparation of fitness personnel. And I see more and more the people that they're in the public eye, the people that are really educating the public on fitness topics seem to be people that aren't that well credentialed, if credentialed at all, in our field. I mean, it goes from I go to the Y and I see of 9 or 10 personal trainers up there, maybe 2 have degrees in our field. And I think our field has been lax in speaking out against this sort of thing. Psychologists wouldn't stand it for a minute. I remember when Dan Gould was at UNCG that we were talking about sports psychology, and the psychological group in the state pounced on that. You can't call yourself psychologists and and that sort of thing. We seem politically to be a bit naive, and it does come down. I think it will come down to a question eventually. People say, well, why do you need a 4-year degree in fitness when these people are not only just fitness people, but they're leaders in the field and writing the textbooks.
Right.
So I think we need to really concentrate on that. I just don't think we've been as active politically as we should. And I don't know if it's the Academy's role to do this, or AKA's role, or NACP role. But maybe together we need to start mounting efforts to become a political force to ensure the survival of our field. And I think this fitness thing is one way we can do it.
Those are very interesting comments, Shirl. It actually raises another question for me, and that is, what do you see as the kind of the primary focus and purpose for the American Kinesiology Association, and do you what should be the relationship between the American Kinesiology Association and the Academy and NACP? Are you pleased with that association? What is the connection between those three groups? And could those three groups be working more closely together, or should they be working more closely together, in your opinion? I know that I've thrown out several questions. I at times I think that our field would be better served if all three merged into an organization with sub-entities. The Academy's efforts to get recognized in the National Research Council, I think that's what I call a political advocacy role. And I think, I don't know, it seems to me that might be a bit unusual for an honor society to do, although I may stand corrected on that. That kind of advocacy work seems to me to be more properly done by the AKA. As to the relationship between AKA and NACP, honestly, I don't know. I can't necessarily distinguish between the two in terms of different missions, and I think I think there's probably some duplication of mission probably there, and to a certain extent, I worry that the Academy may want to duplicate what AKA is doing, or AKA might want to duplicate what the Academy is doing, and I think that would be unfortunate, because I think there's room for both missions. The Academy is a place to present scholarship, provide a forum for discussing scholarship and honoring scholars. AKA is a place you do things, you get things done. And I think AKA's been pretty good at that, but I think there's more they can do. And then NACP seems to me to be kind of somewhere in between the scholarship in the doing things. Yes. Well, there was an interesting conversation that I had with a couple of members of the NAK, the Academy. We're talking about, it was mentioned to me that a number of Academy members thought that each year the session should be devoted just strictly to research and scholarship. But yet there was another, maybe a smaller minority, thought that we should use our yearly meetings to also talk about professional issues and concerns. Now, where I think I come down on this is a little bit of both. Would you agree with that, or should the Academy be strictly for the dissemination of research and scholarship, and not really delve into the professional issues and concerns as much?
Well, if I had to choose right now, I would say yes. I would say that, you know, professional concerns and concerns about the life of again, the broad term political, I would say, issues. I think AKA might be better prepared to do that. It touches a broader, in a way, a broader swath of people. In some ways, you know, it's department heads, many of whom, of course, aren't in the academy. And so there's a way I can see it as more broad-based in a way, and maybe better suited for that kind of thing. But you know, probably what we need is a national meeting of the two bodies, some sort of meeting. And I know the boards of directors have met before. I think we did at Williamsburg, or parts of the board. Somehow we need to meet, and I think iron these things out.
Yes, yes. Shirl, very good. Is there anything else that? There? Yes, I'm still here.
My battery is going dead.
Well, I'll tell you what, Shirl. That's if I think that's. I don't want to hold you up any longer. I loved our conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to say in conclusion?
I think I've said about all I have to say, Dave.
Okay. Well, it's been terrific,
I've
Shirl.
lectured for an hour.
And you will get a good teacher evaluation from me, that's for sure.
Well, that's good. Just so as a merit raise next year, that's all I care about.
Well, I really, really appreciate your time, Shirl. It's been a whole lot of fun and interesting to talk to you. And look for your picture and your interview to be up on the website in a not too distant future. Good. Okay, all right, Dave, Shirl, well, thanks for doing this. Well, thank you, and have a good day. Okay, bye. Bye-bye.